There is a darkness that lies deep in the thick briars of history that, no matter how little it is spoken of, when you read it, you know that its eerie skeleton could come back from underneath the surface of indifference. This buried monster engulfed the lands of Yugoslavia, and one of its tentacles, the Albanian fascists, members of the Handschar and Skanderberg divisions, committed atrocities expected of those possessed by the demon of tribalism. Before the outbreak of World War II, the Albanians were key collaborators of Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany in the Balkans. Through various political, military, and religious organizations and associations, they supported the idea of the Greater Albania, along with extreme anti-Serb sentiments. The Germans had a strong interest in the Balkans for, amongst other reasons, its natural resources. For example, before the onset of the Second World War, the Germans tried to buy off the bonds of the Trepča lead mine from English shareholders because its resource was needed for the German war machine. Kosovo and Metohija were a geostrategic space between Kosovska Mitrovica and the Trepča mine. The German counterintelligence service Abwehr held a large network in Kosovo and Metohija prior to the Second World War. The intelligence service's head office was right in Kosovska Mitrovica, and its main agent, Jafar Deva, had formed an organization called Mirhamet, which means mercy. It was presented as a humanitarian organization, but this was a front for its real operation, which was stirring up the ethnic antagonism of the Albanians for the interests of Nazi Germany, whose objective was to recruit the Albanians for military formations that would be committing atrocities during the Second World War.
Good Friday morning along the coast of Albania. Good Friday morning when the world pauses in its labors to remember the Prince of Peace. But today in the tiny kingdom on the Adriatic, people look out across their harbors down the muzzles of Italian guns, look into the faces of Italian soldiers, look up to masses of Italian warplanes, read leaflets in their own language, calling upon them to surrender immediately or be massacred from the air. Some reports say the Albanians resisted the invaders, but what can a nation do?
On April 7th, 1939, just 5 months before the eruption of the Second World War, Italy invaded Albania. The country was overtaken in just 5 days, forcing the Albanian ruler, King Zog I Ahmed Bey Zogu, to flee to Greece. The King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel III, accepted the crown given to him by the Parliament of Albania. The Royal Albanian Army was then integrated into the Royal Italian Army. An Albanian fascist party was established with Albanian black shirts based on the Italian fascist movement. After the Axis invasion of Yugoslavia on April 6, 1941, Italian Albania expanded into other parts of Yugoslavia. Parts of Montenegro were given to Albania, while Kosovo and Metohija were severed from Serbia and made part of Albania. This Kosovo-Metohija region, alongside the surrounding territory annexed to Greater Albania, was called New Albania. Kosovo and Metohija were divided between 3 invaders: the Italians, who backed the creation of Greater Albania, the Germans, who were holding Kosovska Mitrovica and Trepča, and the Bulgarians, who got a smaller part of Kosovo. On June 29th of 1941, Mussolini issued a decree establishing Greater Albania, constituting not only Kosovo and Metohija, Plav and Gusinia, but also parts of western Albania, Debar, Tetovo, Gostivar, and Kitchevo. The Albanians in Kosovo were given control by Italy over Kosovo and were encouraged to open Albanian language schools, something that was demanded by the pioneers of Albanian nationalism in the League of Prizren. To further establish Kosovo being a part of Albania, the Italian fascists granted Albanian citizenship to the Albanians of Kosovo and allowed them to fly the flag of Albania. The Italians delegated authority to Ajas and Beys, trusted fascists and Hojas, and in former Gendarmerie stations, Albanians formed militia units. The lust for blood was stirring and rising, and would soon erupt with its demonic manifestation. The Italians brought over an imam, Tahir Hoxha, from northern Albania to the region of Plav to help organize volunteer units. In July of 1941, in Plav, in front of the Vullnetars, Albanian volunteers militia, he declared a speech for massacres, quote, "The soul of every believer will go to Jannah if you show no mercy and revenge for the Vesojevic tribe, a major Serbian tribe. You will make no sin if you burn their homes, cottages, and yards, if you steal their cattle and rip out their crops, seize their girls and women and take them to be yours, while men, even in cradles, kill to each and every one, leaving no trace of our old blood enemies, the Vasiljeviches." Serbs and Montenegrins who had settled in Kosovo from lands devastated by the First World War and were allocated with a piece of land through the agrarian reform were murdered and driven out. Within 1941, 11,168 families were expelled from Kosovo and Metohija, taking refuge in Serbia and Montenegro. Between 1941 and 1944, 100,000 Serbs were driven out of Kosovo and Metohija and were banned from returning in the post-war period by the communist regime. On the other hand, 75,000 Albanians who settled in Kosovo and Metohija during the Second World War were granted Serbian citizenship after the war. Albanian nationalists, such as members of the Albanian nationalist paramilitary Bali Kombetar National Front, took advantage of the situation and attacked their Serb neighbors, killing around 10,000 people by the end of 1941, and burned down the homes of as many as 30,000 Serbs and Montenegrins by the end of the war, in the cause of jihad and creating a pure Albanian state. Albanian members of volunteer units would come to Serbian villages and order locals not to cultivate the land, as it did not rightfully belong to them. Carlo Umilita, an Italian diplomat traveling through Kosovo and Metohija in 1941, wrote in his memoirs of the horrors of that year, quote, "The Albanians are out to exterminate the Slavs. People stand in the streets waiting for our military trucks and vehicles to pass by, begging our soldiers to take them to old Serbia and Montenegro, awaiting the salvation there." Umilta visited Pristina, Djakovica, and Peć, and in one region he found villages where not a single house has a roof. Everything has been burned. There were headless bodies of men and women strewn on the ground. The Muslims in the cities Plav and Gusinia stirred up the old blood rage against the Serbs and held a meeting in which the mobs were heard screaming, "No mercy for the Serbs! Capture them all and shoot them at the Orthodox cemetery." As a result, a mob captured around 50 prominent Serbs from Plav and surrounding areas and shot them all at the Orthodox cemetery on the east side of Plav. Marko Bogdanovic from the village of Zirza remembered, quote, "On the 7th day of April, the Aronauts, Albanians, rose up in an uprising and on that occasion burned down all the settlers' houses. In 1941, the Albanian nationalists attacked the Devicha monastery where they murdered Damaskin Boskovic, and there is even a photo of the killing happening. He was beaten with rifle butts and tortured, dragged over thorns and stones, and finally shot to death in the middle of October 1941. After the murder, the Albanian thugs razed the monastery to the ground. In September of 1943, the Albanian nationalists and fanatics founded the Second League of Prizren, continuing on the very movement of the First League of Prizren. And it was this organization that would carry out most of the intelligence and military actions on behalf of the Germans. In that same month, Italy capitulated to the Allies, thus leaving control over Albania solely to the Germans. To help Germany control Kosovo without having to use too many German troops, the decision was made to form an Albanian SS division. Such was the birth of the SS Skanderberg, for which 6,491 Albanians were chosen and inducted. The Albanians in the Skanderberg division were mostly Muslim, of the Bektashi, Sufi, and Sunni sects of Islam, but the division also contained several hundred Albanian Catholics, followers of John Marco Gioni.
Prelude to invasion. From 100 African bases, Allied bombers swarm across the Mediterranean, softening Italian island strongholds with overwhelming air power.
In August of 1943, fascist Italy was being crushed by the Allies, and so the Germans deployed the 2nd Panzer Army to the Balkans to control areas previously occupied by the Italians. One of these areas was Albania. The Germans took control of all Albanian forces who collaborated with fascist Italy, including the Albanian nationalist paramilitary Bali Kombëtar, which had been committing atrocities on the Serbs and Montenegrins. Numerous Albanians were recruited into the 13th Waffen Mountain Division of the SS Handjar, which had mainly Bosnians and Croats in its ranks and operated in the German-backed independent state of Croatia. For 6 months, the division had about 1,000 Albanians from Kosovo and the Sanjak, who made up the 1st Battalion of the 2nd Regiment. In early 1944, preparations for the creation of the SS Skanderberg Division began. The division, whose name was given by Goebbels personally, sought to create an ethnically pure Kosovo, purged of Orthodox Serbs, Jews, and Gypsies. The Untermenschen, subhuman, according to the Germans, who were targeted for extermination. While it was a Muslim Balkan division, the SS Skanderberg was placed under the complete command of German commissioned officers. Even the sub-officer positions were rarely given to Albanians, with the exception of some fanatics. Albanians who were already members of the Handjar division were brought over to the SS Skanderberg. Muslims from Bosnia and Herzegovina also joined the ranks of Skanderberg. According to one estimate, 60% of Skanderberg's members were Muslim Bosnians, while the remaining 40% were Albanians. After Italy's capitulation to the Allies, 10,000 Albanians joined the SS Skanderberg division. The most egregious members of the society joined the ranks of the division. Criminals from Kosovo and Metohija, guilty of the most heinous of crimes, were allowed to escape justice if they joined the SS Skanderberg. The unit became responsible for securing Germany's position in the regions of Kosovo and Metohija, Kukës in Albania, Blav and Gusinia in Montenegro, and Western Macedonia. Its main recruiter was Zafar Deva, an intelligence agent working for the Germans and who became Minister of Interior of the so-called Greater Albania after the capitulation of Italy. He organized many conferences to present recruitment propaganda for the SS Skanderberg. Speeches were given by imams and fascist intellectuals and also by Divisional Commander SS Untergruppenführer August Schmidhuber. Men were given promises of a comfortable life and privileges in the new European order created by Germany. The Germans also brought over 140 Muslim soldiers who deserted the Soviet army and used them to stoke up the local Muslim populations to join the SS unit. Paying a visit to the imams who made provocative speeches was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. It was in fact the Mufti who trained these Albanian imams, all 15 of them, in the Center for Imams Training located in Berlin, founded by the Mufti himself. The Mufti's activities were superintended by Reichsfuhrer SS Himmler, who, alongside the Mufti, envisioned the development of, quote, good SS members and soldiers by awakening and strengthening the faith. During the First World War, the Austro-Hungarian Empire declared a jihad, Holy Islamic War, against the Serbs through the rage of the Albanians. During the Second World War, the Third Reich, Germany and Austria, declared another jihad. The song of history, yet again, rhymes with the prose of destruction. It wasn't just Muslims who partook in the inhumanities. The Albanian Nazis had their imams, but the Albanian Catholics who joined the SS unit had their priests backing them. Massacres were done for both ethnic and religious ideology. Serb Orthodox cemeteries were desecrated, and Serbian churches and monasteries were destroyed and turned into torture chambers. The Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, held central place for recruiting Albanians for the division, using the Hojas, imams, to influence people into joining the Nazis. The Mufti visited the division to give the recruits his blessing, and during his visit he did not forget to give a Nazi salute. As was with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the main threat to the German Reich in the Balkans was Serbia, and so, just like the Austro-Hungarians did, the Germans backed the Albanians against the Serbs. In a document prepared by the Office of the Holy Synod of Archbishops in 1945, one can read of the horrific destruction done by the Albanian fascists in Kosovo and Metohija. Quote, anyone who would pass through Kosovo and Metohija today would find a sad picture. He would find thousands of burned and destroyed and completely deserted houses. He would find many churches and monasteries destroyed. He would find entire villages completely deserted. According to the testimony of Gavrilo Govjanic, a professor from Peć, it was already in 1941 that they destroyed 65% of the Serbian settlement houses in the Peć county and 95% in other counties in Metohija, so that only incinerators remained. Orchards were cut, plows were trampled, and cemeteries were largely destroyed. In a testimony given on July 20th, 1941, the priest Dimitrije Sekularac stated, quote, I left the parish because I was previously robbed by Arnot, Albanians. Bare souls, me, my wife, and our 6 children ran away the moment I had to be killed, and maybe my family too, because many Serbs fell, killed, and Serbian women and children were tortured. My real observations from the dark days are this. Our army retreated in disorder from Kačanik and other places. Gendarmerie leaves his stations and also retreats. Arnot, conscripts, escaped from the army, brought weapons, changed clothes, and many in military uniform are already at work. They are attacking Serb soldiers, gendarmeries, and others. Fighting is going on all sides. Houses are set on fire. Prominent citizens are killed if they are not in the army. The screams of women and children can be heard. Cry after cry. No one can help anyone. The German army has not yet arrived. Ours is in disarray. Anarchy rejoices. Arnots have no compassion. They beat, kill, rob. The Serbian people are in a panic. He is evacuating, but he doesn't know where. We are trying to come to a conversation with our Arban leaders and primarily with the presidents of municipalities who in Yugoslavia enjoyed privileges and were favored by our government. To our regret and bitter surprise, they became more dangerous for us than the others. Stevan Pasetovic, a cafe owner, was dragged out of his house by members of the Albanian Gendarmerie, butchered and thrown into the city garbage dump. His corpse, all dismembered, was found a few days later in this garbage dump. Many of the murders were documented by local Orthodox churches, of which the victims were members. Abbot Sava of the Istok parish in Metohija compiled a list of 102 Serbian names of all named Orthodox Serbs killed by Albanians. Parish priest Borislav Kevkic of the Lipljan parish compiled a list of 60 Serbs murdered or killed in battle by Albanians. The list gives the name and the way that the person was killed. An example reads as follows: Spasa Milisevic, killed by a rifle on the road in 1941. Bogdan Svejic, killed in Pristrina. Zafir Spasic, killed in his yard in Asovo. Velibor Markovic, killed at the age of 19. Dorde Aksic and his wife Mirjana, killed on the same day. Ilija Radjenovic, killed at his home with a rifle. Jovan Denic, killed by a rifle, and his son Jordan together. Nikola Lazic, killed on the road. In the archives of the Rasko-Prizren Eparchy, there is a list of priests murdered by the Albanian nationalists. It speaks of how Andrija Popovic and Hieromonk Nikodim from the Goriocha monastery were murdered by Albanians in order to intimidate the Serbian population to make them flee and emigrate. It speaks of a priest named Todor Sekulic from Ljubizda, near Prizren, who succumbed to wounds sustained from the explosion of a bomb planted in the Dekani monastery by the Albanian fascists in October of 1942. All the churches and all the settler villages of Metohija were destroyed to the ground, which were already burned in April of 1941, and the Serbian population was killed and expelled. The Gračanica and Sokolica monasteries were looted. The Samodreza church was ransacked. The frescoes and icons were destroyed. The church's vessels and apparitions were broken and torn. In the Church of St. Peter in Pol, during 1943 to 1944, the Albanian authorities kept the Serbs, about 100 of them, from the east and the surrounding villages detained day and night, and this lasted for months, and people were not allowed to go outside, so they had to defecate in the church, and the church of the Goriocha monastery served as a prison for them during the mass arrest of Serbs. In July of 1944, the SS Skanderberg, alongside the Prince Eugen Division, which consisted of Croats, Romanians, and Albanians, showed their true demonic embodiment in the villages of Velika and Gornja Rezanica in Montenegro. During the second half of July of 1944, fierce battles erupted between the anti-fascist and the Prince Eugen and Skanderberg divisions around Andrijajevica, Velije Krs, and Balija. The SS divisions were defeated and fled across the Lim Valley to break through the Kakor Pass and Rugova Gorge towards Peć. These fleeing SS officers came to the village of Gornja Luge, where they took 2 women and 5 children, forced them inside the house of Miladin Kulafic, and burned them alive. They came to the village of Ulotina, forced 3 children and a woman inside the home of Novica Soskic, and set the whole house on fire, cooking the people alive. While in the village of Gračanica, the SS officers seized a 16-year-old girl named Saveta Mijovic and began to try to rape her. She held on for dear life onto an oak tree as the criminals pulled her hair. They then bludgeoned her with the butt of a rifle. As she lied on the ground, fainted, they murdered her. They arrived at the villages of Velika and Gornja Rezanica, where for 2 hours and 15 minutes they butchered 428 people, 120 of whom were children. Milovan Selebzic, in his book The Ballasts, wrote, "This poor village of Montenegrin Highlanders has experienced the slaughter of unthinkable proportions. There were arson fires in houses, cottages, and sheds, with people in it. Burnt human flesh could be smelt miles away. Girls were killed while defending their honor. They raged to frenzied SS soldiers and ballasts and were killed by bullets or fire to which they have been thrown alive." Before the massacre, the Imam, Sait Hoxha Sahmanovic, who who served as an intelligence officer for the SS Prinz Eugen, would walk through Velika telling the villagers that if they stayed in their homes, the Nazis would not harm them, and that they should welcome the SS officers with bread. There were villagers who knew that the Nazis were coming thirsty for blood and hid in shelters in the woods, and there was sight to tell them to return back to their homes. Accompanying sight were 3 old men who told the Velikians to prepare plenty of food for the coming soldiers. This was all a way to make the locals comfortable. The Germans will not harm anybody they find in his house, Said told the locals. You should offer them with bread and salt, as the soldiers are hungry, but if they find someone in shelter or out of house, will be shot immediately. Milunka Vucetic went to the SS officers with his brother to do what Said recommended, and this is what happened. I approached the house of Milovan Vucetic. Around afternoon, an army from Ivanpolia came into the area. We decided to take them bread, salt, which we had. When the army approached, I saw how in the olive grove Tomislav, the son of Milovan Vucetic, played. 2 soldiers took him. A 3rd ran over. One took out a knife and began to skin the child alive from his eyes downwards. I could not watch what occurred. I began screaming, and his mother, Leposava Lepa, ran over to protect him. She was killed. Dusan Simonovic witnessed the slaughter of his children at the hands of the SS Skanderberg. That's how my daughters died. Zorka, aged 14, Kristinia, aged 8, and son Milorad, aged 2. Son Mato was 4 years old. They caught him alive and cut off both of his legs at the knees, tied him up and hung him on a plum tree, and turned his head downwards. Radoja Kenezevi, a survivor of the Velika massacre, remembered, I was only 11 years old when Hitler's divisions, Skanderberg and Prinz Eugen, burned down the village of Velika and killed about 428 persons. Our family paid a heavy price that day. On that day, my mother, Stoyanka, was killed and then her body burned. The same fate befell my 2 brothers, Nedaliko, 5 years old, and Ratko, 11 months old. My sister, Rabba, 18 years old, was killed as she was trying to protect her mother and young brothers, and she too was burned. Divina Vucetic, a survivor of the massacre, recounted, a soldier approached with a gun. I told them that I wanted to bring him bread, as I was ordered to. He replied to that, Germany has bread. He spoke our language, Serbian, perfectly. He then shot at me, killing my son Boza in my lap, and wounding me in the right hand. In the house of Tomica Gojovic, out of 23 members, 19 were murdered and only 4 survived by mere chance. The killers took Mileva and Novka Stesovic and tossed them alive into a burning house. When they tried to rape Danica and Mileva Tomovic and faced strong resistance, they cut the victims with knives and threw them into the fire. They took a pregnant woman, Milica Simonovic, ripped open her guts, and the baby fell out. 10 pregnant women were murdered in Velika. The killers had a very sick and sadistic desire to see the baby alive outside the womb so that the horrified mother, now eviscerated and gutted, could see her living child moments before both of them were slain. Before the eyes of horrified mothers, children were butchered in utmost horrors. They were skinned alive, their arms and legs cut off, and then they were thrown into flaming houses. In the midst of flames and razed homes, cries and wails and screams resounded through the billowing smoke, the sky tainted with the thickest clouds from the lofty fires in that horrid day.